Joining me now from the other side of the aisle is Republican Senator Mike Braun of Indiana. Senator Braun, welcome back to Meet the Press, sir.
Hey, my pleasure, Chuck.
Well, let me start. I'm going to start with the abortion laws in your home state. Some would argue some are somewhat restrictive from the perspective of a person seeking an abortion, but I want to put them down here as a baseline. In Indiana, there's state-directed in-person counseling. You can't do telemedicine. There's an 18-hour waiting period. There's a physical exam and an ultrasound, parental consent for minors, and the ban begins at 22 weeks, 2 weeks shorter than many other states that are at 24. You have said you are 100% pro-life. Is the law in Indiana, in your view, strong enough to support your pro-life position?
Chuck, I think it begs the question in general, whether our state is where it needs to be, whether Mississippi's, whether New York, Illinois. You hit it on the head earlier, political or practical. When it comes to issues like this that divide our country in a way to where we're never going to get to 60 votes on any of this stuff, I think the practical solution is when it's not enumerated, return it to the states. The beauty of our system is that it's federal. It's got all these different ideas. And when you try to nationalize, federalize, the way the other side of the aisle is doing on more than just this, I think you're constantly in that area of contention. And when I got here 3 years ago, of course, we've gone through 2 impeachments. We've gone through the biggest health care crisis. A lot of these issues don't even get discussed, like the high cost of health care, maybe climate, maybe budgeting. How do we pay for all this? When it comes to things like abortion, I think it's clear it's time to turn it back to the states. Let the diversity of this country show forth. It eliminates a lot of the contention to where we become the Hatfields and McCoys on many of these issues.
So when do you believe abortion should be available? Because you're going to have to vote on these issues now. Every elected official in the country is going to have to state very specifically now. You know, a lot of times elected officials have been able to hide behind Roe. Either you're for it or against it. But now you got to get to specifics. So in your view, when should abortion be legal or be available?
So in my case, when you believe in the sanctity of life, you want abortions to be eliminated from the landscape if you can. You also in the context of reasonability. And the fact is, regardless of what any one individual, maybe with the point of view of mine or of Amy's, you're not going to settle it in a homogenized way. And that needs to reflect itself throughout states, and whatever one's opinion is, whatever you're trying to do politically, why try to do it at the national level? We generally don't do things well here anyway, and on something as contentious as this, it seems like it would make common sense, it'd be practical and not political to send it back to the states and let every state do what they want to do and live with it. And if you don't like it, then go to work within those legislatures. It was never enumerated in the Constitution that this would be something that would be done at the federal level. And it takes the decibel level, the caustic nature of politics, as we see it here in D.C., takes it to another place.
I understand it. You don't believe, though, there should be a baseline protection of a woman being able to get and have access to abortion. You don't believe there should be any baseline protection for that?
I think it's a difference, again, without the specificity of this issue, is when you come down to things like this, why you want to nationalize that in, say, your Bill of Rights, so to speak. It was never intended. When you have a judicial ruling, like occurred back in 73 and 92, that was a judicial ruling. And now it's being said to be constitutional, and that's where you get into the contention, into the highly vitriolic nature of politics, and I think that ought to be the domain of the states. That's the way the Constitution intended it to be.
All right, so you want to see a ban on abortion. How would you enforce a ban on abortion?
You're going to let that up to the individual states, and you might find that right mix. I'm not saying we got it right in Indiana. I'm saying it's not right in New York. Maybe you find that happy medium.
What's your idea?
More people are going to say, hey,
what's your idea?
My idea is that with what's happened with technology, when you look at all the things that we know now about the unborn. It needs to be different. It needs to be different from where it is. And I don't have the silver bullet. I don't intend to put it out there. I just think you got a better idea of getting where you need to be, not trying to homogenize it at the national level.
It sounds like you're uncomfortable with figuring out how you would enforce the ban, because I think that's a question. Do you criminalize abortion? Would you criminalize it?
I'm perfectly comfortable with doing it, just not at the level where everybody's got to live with the same thing. And when you talk about criminalizing it, then all you're doing is taking this to a logical extreme that you'll never get to anyway. We just need to take it off of where it is, send it back to the states. Let's find that right way to address it. And this applies to many other issues as well.
Well, I want to ask, because one of the issues, look, I originally invited you on to talk about the vaccine mandate, and you're a vigorous opponent of the federal government's private sector vaccine mandate. And you're worried about the liberty of the unvaccinated. What about the liberty of the woman who doesn't want to carry a pregnancy to term? Why should the government force that? You don't want the government to force people to get a vaccine. You're essentially advocating for the government to force a woman to carry a pregnancy to term that she may not want to do.
You might try to create that as an issue of equivalency. I don't. In this case of a vaccine mandate, and I think clearly the turf I chose to pursue would be doing it through the Congressional Review Act. That was set up for the intended purpose of an executive branch that got into overdrive. And I chose to go that route and got all other Republican senators on board quickly. Now it's bipartisan. Joe Manchin decided to come on and not do it tacitly to where he's going to be outspoken about it. To me, that is different. And if you try to make those equivalent, I think you're going to get into that current paradigm we're in, to where you're arguing about things that just divide us. In this case, it does go to, and when you couch it, just a moment, when you couch it as getting the vaccine or lose your job, and we talked about it the other day, well, you got the ability to be tested weekly. In certain parts of the country, those are one and the same, along with the ultimatum that goes along with how this was done through OSHA. And what other issue does this draw us into down the road, unrelated to where you have the heavy hand of government? Here, I'm saying on the abortion issue, take it back to the states where I think the Constitution intended it to be.
Finally, though, on the vaccine mandate front, you are worried about forcing the unvaccinated in that situation. What about protecting the vaccinated? What about the freedom of the vaccinated to get through this pandemic? And the only way we're going to get through it is if we get more people vaccinated, and the mandates have worked. I know you don't like them, but they've worked. Well, the mandates have worked if you think that, in my case, when I look at how this all started back in March of 2020, and we had that heavy hand, even at many local levels, of you're an essential business, you're not. I was clear up front. Lucky we've got a vaccination. Of course, there were arguments about who was going to orchestrate it. We got it out quickly. And transmission itself and everything we've learned about COVID, it is a formidable foe. Businesses took it seriously from the get-go, small, medium, and large. They wanted to protect their customers, wanted to keep their employees safe. Again, it comes back to, you want things orchestrated at the federal level where we don't create results that are sustainable, or do you want to bring this back to a lower level of authority? And that has nothing to do with what you think about the vaccine or the disease and how you fight it. Senator Braun, appreciate you coming on, sharing your perspective, a reminder that there is still a sort of a basic divide in this country, more government versus less government. Appreciate you coming on, sharing your perspective with us, sir. I'd agree with that. Thank you, Chuck.